The changes are in your life. You've had a common cold before. It causes sneezing, coughing, and just make you feel awful. The worst case about the common cold is that you can take the medications to help with the symptoms, but you really cannot treat it actually cold with antibiotics. But why? Well, let's talk about the causes here. A virus. The common cold is caused by virus. All living things in the world are made by one or more cells. And did you know? Viruses are not cells. Are not technically living material because since they are like many characteristics of life, but there is debate in calling them, and then non-living material as well. Medications are like antibiotics attack bacteria such as Escherichia coli. Antifungal can be used on fungi like athlete's foot, which are living material. But virus is not same like fungi or bacteria. And you cannot also classify a virus as prokaryote or eukaryote because they are not cell. If they are not cell, if they are not prokaryote, eukaryote, so what's virus structure like? First of all, viruses are small, more than bacteria, more than fungi, more than cells. So you typically are going to need an electron microscope to see a virus.
And viruses come in many shapes. Our favorite one is the bacteriophage. It's not very fancy, but it is a type of virus that tends to attack the bacteria. One thing all viruses have in common is that they have some type of genetic material. This genetic material can be in the form of DNA or RNA. Viruses usually have some kind of protein coat, also known as a capsid. The capsid can protect the DNA or RNA genetic material. Viruses can have other structures. Some viruses package special enzymes with them. Some viruses have an outer envelope.
And this addition can be useful to the virus in virus replication. One thing that makes virus replication is unique because virus cannot replicate without a host. Viruses tend to be very specific for the host that they are going to go infect, but if anything that is alive, they can be a host too. Why? Because the cell in the living things has a machinery that viruses need in order to replicate. And we are going to talk about two types of viral replication cycles. The first one is lytic cycles. In the lytic cycles, viruses are very selective, attached to the host cells. It often binds with the receptor that cell has, which gives access to attach. The virus can then inject either their DNA or RNA, depending on what kind of genetic material it has, into the cell. And some types of viruses are actually taken inside the cell themselves. Now, you will think the cell will notice viral DNA or RNA or an entire virus that has been taken in, right? But in many cases, it does not. So the genetic material will get into the cell's DNA and start to give some instruction, which in this case is very bad. Why? Because the instruction tells the cell to make copies of virus, and the cell will start to build viruses by its own resources. And it starts making so many copies of the virus that it can cause the cell membrane of the host rupture and explode.
So, What happens is now these new viral copies get out of the cell and they go and infect other cells. This is known as the lytic cycle. By the way, the lysing of the cell membrane is a very bad thing for the cell because the cell cannot survive without its cell membrane. The other cycle is called the lysogenic cycle, and I like to remember this is the longer word, so I like to think of this as the longer sneaky cycle. Viruses that go through this cycle tend to do the same thing at the beginning. They inject their genetic material, but this time the genetic material stays hidden in the host genetic material. What happens is that when the host makes new cells, it replicates its own genetic material and the viral genetic material. Then those daughter cells make new cells and they also replicate their own genetic material and the viral genetic material and so on. That is the lysogenic cycle.
That may not seem like a problem, but it really becomes one if it gets triggered to go into the lytic cycle from the point, because then all of those cells that had the viral genetic material can start assembling viruses. As far as what triggers it to go into the lytic cycle, it can vary. It could be a chemical trigger, for example, or the lack of food for the host. Going back to the common cold, a lot of times it has to run its course. Your immune system will typically take care of it, and medications can help the symptom feel not as bad. But unfortunately, some viruses are extremely complicated, such as HIV. A virus that can lead to AIDS, like most viruses, it is very specific. It binds to a CD4 glycoprotein that is found on the surface of specific cells, such as helper T cells. The problem about the particular target is that helper T cells play an important role in protecting the body in the immune system. Since HIV goes after these immune cells, it can make a person that is infected with HIV vulnerable to other infections.
There are medications that have been developed to help keep HIV from replicating as quickly, and there continues to be research looking into ways to keep the virus from attaching, because if the virus cannot attach, it can insert its genetic material. A problem that continues to be a challenge is that many viruses, including HIV, can mutate. So, a treatment developed against a certain virus type might not work on a mutated form. So, with our talk about viruses, you might wonder, is there anything positive about viruses? Well, viruses can play a useful role in gene therapy. And some of these viruses can target a certain types of pest insects. A virus that targets pest insects could be an alternative to a chemical pesticide. But still, it's important to consider that there could be consequences in the ecosystem too. Well, that's it for now. Thank you.